I am DM Zone, this is Gamer's Oasis. Let's get into it. So only humans can become assassins. Assassins also have to be neutral, and they have a minimum stat requirement of 12 for dexterity, intelligence, and strength. It's also important to know that assassins need to be a part of an assassin's guild. Let me talk about this in much greater detail. Assassins can serve as thieves, though their abilities are 2 levels lower than they actually are. This means that a 3rd level assassin would actually be a 1st level thief. They are restricted to leather like a thief, but they can use a shield and any weapon like a fighter. This also includes magical weapons.
I think one of the more important things to know also is even though the assassin is considered to be a thief class, as you can see here, they use a D6 hit points.
When I read about the assassin class, to be honest, it sounded extremely specific to something that would be in Dave Arneson's world, Blackmoor. Like local assassins literally in Blackmoor, it seemed to have a pre-baked story set with a class that was well played, well known, and understood properly within that community. This is very unlike original Dungeons & Dragons in general, where everything is left so open and not so confined and controlled. A fighter could be a swashbuckler or it could be a knight, for example. However, I think there are some things that need to be upheld. For example, when it talks about the assassin's minimum stats, and that it's restricted to leather, and it can use a shield and any weapon, including magical weapons, but it has to be neutral. Those are structural things. Those are things that define the class in a very real way that requires it to be within a certain parameter. However, when it says that it counts as a thief 2 levels lower, that is saying the pacing. The XP amount that requires to level sets the pacing. The fact that to reach Grand Master it has to challenge a Grand Master sets the pacing. So there is no way to obtain 14th level unless you are able to defeat an established 14th level or higher, in my opinion, Grand Master Assassin. However, all assassins being part of the same guild, or at least society of guilds, I guess you could say, I would say that requires maybe special training that is not exactly lawful per se, but has some sort of ethos to it, like a code of honor. I'm going to use John Wick a lot in this story. Imagine something that the people he runs into and the assassins he deals with. But there doesn't have to be like some great overarching assassins guild, kind of like what he was a part of. The Lord in his castle has some sort of shadow council that does things that he can't get his hands dirty with. Or maybe it's the Spire of Knowledge, from which, if you watched any of my videos in the past, I talk a little bit about the Sage Guild and maybe how it's a little bit like a religious order for the enlightened elites versus purely known as an Assassin's Guild. Maybe they have a group of people they fund and maintain for purposes of defending themselves and their interests, for example. For also known reasons about not becoming a guild master until level 14, they cannot have followers until level 14 as a guild master. This allows them to have up to 50 people that start out at level 1 and work their way up. The reason why this is not necessarily that they're physically enabled to. It's probably more of an oath, something that they agree to, some code that the assassins believe in. Potentially the party has dealt with an assassin in the past, positively, negatively, whatever the case might be. Maybe this person were to break the code and try and start his own without having the approval from the others. Maybe someone kills a dog, like, John Wick, and he kind of goes rogue, or he tries to retire and he's not allowed, or she's not allowed. If the party has an assassin, then the party assassin has to remain, if it's still covert, how to handle this. Do they handle business on their own? Do they involve the party? They try and trick the party without explaining why. This is something that comes kind of like pre-built into the campaign. Just by existing, this is going to be a story that comes up in a couple ways, probably depending on how long the character's alive. I think the whole process of building a guild from someone making Grandmaster, working their way up with 50 different followers is very interesting. Now, they wouldn't just, here's 50, but they'd worked their way to that point. I think this would make for a very epic story. And if it was a player in a party and you were doing a persistent campaign, I think this is the type of stuff that good stories really are built off of. And I think it'd be very entertaining, especially if they're trying to remain covert and a lot of this is happening behind the scenes. What if the party were to run into it? The dwarf gets in a fight in the bar, whatever. These type of things. What if someone in the party becomes a target of an assassin contract by accident or on purpose? I think also the rise and fall of an assassin guild has pre-baked questions in there as well. What happens if they succeed? What happens if they fail? What were they controlling? What were they pushing back, maybe keeping at bay? What political movement now would be allowed to occur? I think this draws into a very special moment where you don't find this in the game already, talking about good versus evil, with neutral, of course, being in the middle, but that's not the same neutral that's in the game. You see, the neutral that's in the game is the midpoint between lawful and chaos. And that brings a whole new, it's like you just scratch in with a dagger, a whole new set of alignments. Something that looks maybe more modern than what this version of the game would actually look like. So this would be like the first people wanting to change away from this original alignment and trying to add more depth to it, potentially. So there's a lot of other special abilities the assassin has. There's disguise, there's bonus languages for alignment, poisons, there's the assassinations themselves, there's a special XP thing for that. There's becoming a guild master and what that means. I'm going to dive into these each specifically. I just wanted to kind of give you a list of things I'm going to be talking about in the next little bit here. So let's jump into disguise. Disguise isn't necessarily I want to be an elf or I want to look like a nondescript farmer. I mean, I guess that's possible, but it's really kind of meant to be more than that. It's also meant to make you look like a different class entirely. So if a assassin is trying to change their appearance to another class, either the same gender or not, there is a static modifier. For the same gender, it's 5%. If they're trying to be the opposite gender, it's 10%. This is a chance of being spotted or being able to be seen as not their class, and then maybe someone can figure out that they're an assassin. Now, there's a variable number that goes with that. This is based off of the observer. Let's have observer A and let's have observer B. So observer A is a farmer. He's not well known for his intelligence or wisdom. As a matter of fact, between these two, his total score, his combined score would be an 18. According to Supplement II, which that would mean that you would suffer a slight negative to be able to see through a disguise. The rules work like this. 18 is not 0, it's 1. So you have 18, 19, 20. So you are 3 points below 20. Each point equals a percent that is 3% harder to see through disguise, taking that 5% or 10% down to 2 or 7% to see through the disguise. So being more with it with intelligence and wisdom helps. Now luckily, observer B happens to be an elder in town. Now, they're known for their wisdom and intelligence, and their combined stat total would be a 31. This has a positive chance to see through disguise. Now, this isn't compared off of 20. No, that'd be too simple. This is compared off of a 24. I guess what that's supposed to represent is that 5 points essentially would be the ability to have like a neutral ground where it's not all positive and not all negative. It does work out, in my opinion, that way, and I think it's fine. Most people are going to be neutral, not really have a positive or a negative. But in this case, 24 counts as 0 for whatever reason, and now you have 7 points to get to a 31. difference for each one of these points is not 1%, but a 0.5%. So 0.05 of a percent. So every even number is 1%. And you always round down because you need whole numbers. It takes the same numbers from a 5% up to an 8% and from a 10% up to a 13%, making it far more likely you're going to be able to see this. Now, I realize both these numbers are really low, but if you consider how many times in a day you might have to make that check, it's really not that successful. I mean, you're going to have times when you fail that, for sure. The minimum you can get down to is a 1%, and there is no hard cap for the highest a person could be. Okay, bonuses to alignment language. Now, the way alignment language, for those who don't know and maybe haven't watched some of my other videos, is you don't change your alignment language. Whatever your alignment is outside of neutral, that's what your alignment language is. There's actually two, and I don't know why they just don't call it the alignment language of law and the alignment language of chaos, because it's not like there's pink polka dotted or yellow striped alignment languages. There are two. So if you have 16 intelligence, you can pick up either lawful or the chaos. If 18, you can pick up the other. If you have an 18 intelligence as an assassin, you can have both additional language alignment languages in addition to any of the other languages. And if you watch my exceptional stat video, I have a whole thing where I talk about the fact that you should be able to get bonus languages based upon having a higher intelligence. Now, poison, they get a little bit weird real quickly. First of all, there is a belief during this period of time, it's not really well expressed here, but it does exist, that poison in general is evil. The application and the use of it is evil. I would say, as an assassin, it's risky. So here's the deal. If you're within 10 feet and you pull a blade that has poison on it, there's a 50% chance that they will understand this is a poison blade, and it will give them a ferocity bonus, which is able to be gained no other way other than seeing a blade that is poisoned. And this bonus is better than any buff in the game, including strength in many ways, because this can be used with strength and gives you a massive +4 to hit. There's no strength bonus in the game that gives you +4 to hit. Now, +4 to damage can be obtained through strength, but that's still a pretty good strength, and this stacks with it. So this is a terrifying thing for any assassin. Now, true, you touch them with this, and there's a potential they could just die. Now, is it instant? Is it not instant? That's a whole different thing. For some reason, I'm not sure why people fear poison blades versus someone actually pulling the blade on you, especially since at lower levels it's basically a death sentence anyways if you get hit. But these are the rules, and I guess it's up to the referee's discretion whether or not these would be applied evenly, shall we say. It also says that if poison is used with food or drink, the results will be handled by the referee. The details of the poison types will be handled in the future supplement when alchemists are fully covered. Now, here's the crazy part. Alchemists never get fully covered. I went looking for where there was information on the different types of poisons and where these alchemists are. There will be a video coming out in the future talking about alchemists. However, if you guys want me to do a video talking more about creatures with poisons and maybe come up with some sort of where the alchemists get their poisons from, I'm going to go over a list of creatures that are found just in like supplement, just the supplement books, not even going that deep into it. And then from there, I will expand out on that. Just get 50 likes and we'll go ahead and make that video, okay? All right, so here's some of the creatures. We have the giant toad, the pungy ray, which is some sort of like stingray type of thing. There's a water spider, something called a masher. It's a fish that eats coral. Then you have a giant wasp. You have the shawagin, which aka are the devil men of the deep. They themselves are not poisonous, but they arm themselves with poison tridents covered in a deadly poison on its tips, specifically. There's also poisonous coral, which is actually detailed in what happens, which is kind of remarkable. The funny thing about the shawagin, though, is that it's actually a paralyzing poison, which is the only time it's a paralyzing agent, which is the only time that poison doesn't just outright kill so far. Now, I'm sure when the alchemy thing came out, it was supposed to have more levels, more depth into this. This is a part of the game that was probably left on the cutting room floor and never actually fully done, based upon time, efforts, and the fact they're moving to AD&D so fast and moving on to the Holmes Revised Edition and into BICME and BX and this type of stuff. But let me go ahead and talk more about this. The deadly poison the shawagin use is actually a paralyzing agent. This is the only time something like this actually occurs. It's, I guess, vastly different in water than out of water as far as being deadly. Out of water, you just lay there until the poison goes away. In water, you probably drowned. So there is something to that. Now, the ironic part about this is the reason why the shawagins use small tridents that barely cause any bleeding with a poison that makes you paralyzed is so that they can move away from the sharks, because sharks can become fairly mindless when they're in their blood frenzy, attacking even the shawagins. So this is like an intelligence choice. Now, going back to it being an odd choice with the poisons and the creatures and traps, in 1974 and in Supplement 1, this is before Supplement 2 came out and the assassin class was actually made. It specifically talked about death being basically the only option when it comes to poisons. And there are some, like the poisonous cloak, one of the few magic items that has anything to do with poisons, that kills you without even a save throw. Oof. So let's now jump forward to the supposed where is the alchemist class. Well, I scoured everything. I looked through all the supplements. I looked through all the strategic reviews. I looked in the original core rule books. It wasn't there. The early Dragon magazine, and I didn't find it. I had to go all the way out to Dragon Magazine 49 to find an article titled Lehman's Tiny Hut, a recipe for alchemists. I'll put the article across there so you can see what I'm talking about. And if I was to be honest, I don't believe this article was intended to be wrote for original Dungeons and Dragons. So there never was a article designed for this. However, there are some things you could pull from this and probably use. And I'm going to not go too far into this because I plan to actually do this as one of these almost a class type videos, because I feel like this probably was almost a class. And one of the things that this Leonard was doing, or Lynn was doing, was going back and filling holes from like notes and playtesting that never actually became a thing. But in this class, it talks about the fact there are brews, potions, poisons, and they have the ability to identify poisons without having to risk tasting them. There are 4 different types of poisons essentially. There is mild, that do 5d4 points of damage, toxic, which do 5d6. The lethal is the one that we know and love. However, if you save with this one, it actually still does 4d6 damage. And then the 4th type of poison is actually destructive. Basically, in the volatile process of making it, it causes some sort of explosion or corruption of the glass. It erupts, causing 64 points of damage to anything that fails its save. Basically destroying the table or whatever you're working on and potentially killing you in the process. I think the lack of official information allows for the referee to kind of come up with what they want. Things that I think would be good to add would be like paralyzation, sleep, damage, but with the consideration of over time potentially, or an onset delay, allowing the assassin the ability to get away. I think there's room for depth in this space, not just for the negative, but also for some of the positive results. Say something should go your way when you're creating this type of thing. So for example, maybe a person who's able to survive a certain type of poison so many times maybe get some sort of slight immunity to it, or maybe they knock a point off of the dice or whatever. Let's step away from the poisons and let's talk about assassinations. This is a task that can be carried out in many ways. Unlike other editions of the game where literally it's just a percent roll. In this version of it, they talk about in the third book of the 1974 rules as you can hire an assassin to go kill someone. Now they charge $2,000 per mission or 2,000 gold per mission. This is later clarified when you go back and look at it in Blackmoor Supplement II, making reference that this is what it would be for a 6th level thief or assassin, and they actually give the name of the person or whatever. I got to is very specific. Then they go ahead and make a structured payment of like what it would be for a 1st level, what it would be for the Grand Master at 510,000 gold pieces to be able to do an assassination.
So what you see here specifically is the percent chance that you're able to take out a target just by percent, not by actually using the mechanics of combat.
Again, this is structure, pacing, and mechanics. And I think that it'd be possible for a referee to work within this and to take these things into consideration. But I don't feel like the amount of gold that gets paid to the Grand Master, the person who's setting up this whole operation, the one running the guild, is getting a big enough piece of the cut. And why I say that is this. How many assassinations are there? You're not doing a lot, so you have to make money somehow, some way. So they either have to other avenues of income, or they're killing a lot more than 2 or 3 people a year. Now, the experience you get for the assassination works just like a normal monster. You take the hit dice of the person, you add the fact that they have spells and abilities, you get the bonus. You don't share it because unless you are sharing the process, all this XP goes to you. And then whenever you get paid that amount in XP. Now, if it happens to be, again, a group thing, then you can go with the group with that. Now, as I said much earlier in the video, at 14th level, when you become a Grand Master, you can start taking on followers. And there is a theoretical maximum to the level of 14. It's a closed loop, basically saying that no one can reach 14th level unless they themselves have killed another Grand Master. Now, what happens if a Grand Master assassin dies to a dragon? Does a dragon just automatically, like Highlander, assume the position of assassin? No, probably not. What happens if they die in a skiing accident or from natural causes or something, or old age? What happens in these situations? Now, they have a built-in safeguard. They say that if you have an assassin's guild within 2,500 square miles of each other, they'll fight, essentially, or they can't exist. Now, if you have a really big city, I think you could have 2 assassins guild in the same thing. You just assume they go east and west and not really overlap a whole lot. However, that tension, the wars between these 2 turfs, or these 2 groups fighting over the turf, and the innocence that could be caught up into it, could make for a really dynamic and interesting scene. And because this is a closed loop and there's no one new filling it, I think you need some other way of making a level 14. Maybe they have to kill a certain creature to prove their worthiness, and then they get voted in. I think something like that definitely has the mark of a good referee figuring out how that would work. I would also say, let's don't limit them necessarily to 14th level. Everyone else is leveling up beyond that, except for certain classes, of course. But I feel like this class should also continue to level. Now, the thief continues to get levels at 125,000 past 14th level. I think that's just fine to stop the assassin at 14 and say you're a level 12 thief. You can't go become a thief or an assassin again, that'd be silly, but you could go on and become something else. It's just going to cost you 125,000 XP to level up every time, unless it costs more for whatever class you're going to. So if you become a magic user, you start picking up some magic. You start to fill the role. You become not paladin, mind you, but you could become maybe a fighter, and then from there you would actually be able to do it. Now, you're still restricted in your clothes, but what's to say you didn't have like assassin grandmaster that became a fighter who started up maybe a gladiatorial arena, and he brings in Vogue, a bunch of people in leather with a shield, Well, now he fits the role. Now he's the master of the pit that no one can defeat, mostly because he's got a poison blade that he stabs you with, much like Maximus Aurelius got stabbed in Gladiator, the movie. Okay? So, well, what about if you didn't want to go that way? What if you wanted to have some sort of cult that worships spiders as like in the surface, because then you'd have like poisons and whatnot. But the reality is they actually were some sort of death cult. Some sort of like they honored the dead, they worship the dead, they have ancestral worship, they bring back the dead, these type of things. Maybe that's a thing that could happen, and you pick up levels of cleric. Now you're not going to be a cleric of light, obviously, but it doesn't mean you couldn't be, the traveling god or some other thing of that nature. I think all those things are kind of interesting. This class is far more fake it until you make it than what I think a lot of people realize. But I think actually having them obtain something in the end kind of speaks to a darker entity, maybe grooming its pawns to get them in position for wealth and honor and pride, while really there's maybe an outer worldly perspective, like a Cthulhu-like vibe type of thing with some of this stuff. Maybe I'm just looking at this sword and sorcery and that type of stuff. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope it does. Anyways, guys, I think all these things are stories worth exploring, and I'm going to probably incorporate some of this in my world, where before doing this video, I'm not sure I would have incorporated so much with the assassin. Did I get this right? Did I get this wrong? Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Love to hear from you. Thank you. Have a great day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.